Welcome to Calvin's Stories, where a man who built everything refuses to be erased. Enjoy.
My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm 67 years old, and on a Tuesday morning in October, I stood in the lobby of the Hadley Creek County Records Office in Ohio, holding a certified copy of a quitclaim deed that transferred the house I'd lived in for 34 years to a woman who was not my wife. The clerk behind the glass had known me since the Reagan administration. She'd processed easements for me when I was still designing bridges for the state DOT. She watched me read that deed and then, without saying a word, she slid a second document under the partition. A power of attorney. Naming my daughter-in-law Bethany as sole decision maker over everything I owned, everything I'd built, everything I'd saved across 38 years of public service. My wife's signature was on both. Lorraine had not signed either one. I knew because I knew her handwriting better than I knew my own, and because the notary seal on both documents was the old design, the one that Office stopped using in 2021. My hands recognized the wrong stamp before my brain caught up. 38 years of reviewing seals, and my fingers knew. I want you to stop for a moment before I tell you what I did next. If you've ever felt something shift inside your family, slow, careful, almost too small to name, please consider subscribing to this channel and leaving a comment below telling me where you're listening from. We tell stories, hear about ordinary people who got cornered by someone they loved, and what they did when they finally understood what was happening. No theatrics, no revenge fantasies. Just the patient work of a person reclaiming what was theirs. If this story finds you in a place where you needed it, that is not an accident. Stay with me. To understand how I got to that records office on a Tuesday morning with my jaw locked and my hands shaking, you have to go back to the surgery. I had bilateral knee replacement on a Wednesday in August. Both knees, same procedure, same hospital, same surgeon. I'm not a man who does things by halves. I'd been limping for 4 years, working through it, telling Lorraine I'd get to it after the next grandchild's birthday, after the spring planting, after the roof was done. Lorraine finally sat me down at the kitchen table with my own handwritten list of postponements and read it back to me. 41 items going back to 2019. She said, "Marcus, you built 3 bridges in this county that are still standing. You can plan a surgery." So I planned it. I scheduled it for late summer because I wanted to be walking again before Thanksgiving. I lined up my recovery the way I'd lined up project bids for 38 years. Physical therapy 3 times a week with a woman named Sandra Okafor, recommended by my orthopedic surgeon, who had a reputation for being polite and unyielding in equal measure. Walker by the bed, raised toilet seat, frozen meals stacked in the chest freezer in the garage. I thought I had thought of everything. I had not thought of Bethany. Bethany was my daughter-in-law. She married my son James in 2014 in a small ceremony in our backyard, under the maple tree I'd planted the year James was born. She was 28 then. Blonde, bright, with a smile that made every photograph look like an advertisement for something wholesome. She worked part-time at a real estate office and stayed home with the 2 grandchildren, Lily, who was 7 that summer, and Cole, who was 4. James worked as a regional sales manager for an industrial parts distributor and traveled Monday through Thursday every week, covering 5 states. He was on the road more than he was home. That was the configuration. That was the soft spot. I just didn't know it yet. My wife, Lorraine, is 64. She retired from the school librarian job 2 years ago, but still works 3 mornings a week at the branch downtown because she misses the children. She is the most generous person I have ever known. And I want you to understand that her generosity is what they used. Not her weakness, not her gullibility, her goodness. When you build a long marriage with a person, you learn each other's blind spots. And Lorraine's blind spot is that she cannot conceive of a family member intentionally harming us. She watched her own mother nurse a dying sister for 2 years. She believes family closes ranks. She believes family shows up. That belief is the most beautiful thing about her. and it was the door Bethany walked through. 3 days after the surgery, while I was still on the heavy painkillers, sleeping 15 hours a day, Bethany came over with a casserole and a clipboard. I remember the clipboard because it had a checklist on it, printed and laminated, in her neat handwriting. Grocery runs, pharmacy pickups, mail, sorting, insurance calls, PT, scheduling. She told Lorraine she'd taken 2 weeks off from the real estate office to make sure Dad's recovery goes smoothly. She called me Dad. She had never called me Dad before that day. She'd called me Marcus for 10 years. I noticed it through the painkiller haze and filed it away in the back of my mind, the way an engineer files an anomaly in a soil report. Not alarming, but worth watching. I went back to sleep. By the end of that first week, Bethany had a key to our house. Lorraine gave it to her so she wouldn't have to ring the bell when I was napping. By the end of the second week, all of our mail was going to a post office box Bethany had opened in her name. She told me the postal carrier had changed routes, and there had been some confusion with the address. She'd handle it temporarily, until things settled. I was lying in a recliner with ice packs on both knees, watching the ceiling fan turn, and I said, okay. I said okay because I trusted her. I said okay because my son loved her. I said okay because the alternative, questioning a woman who was bringing me soup and helping my wife. Mo quartz seeds der die, helm. Made me a suspicious old man, and I did not want to be that. This is the part of the story I have replayed the most. The moment I handed her the perimeter. By the third week, Bethany was the only person allowed to help. She had not said so out loud, but the neighbor across the street, Diane Holcomb, who had brought a pot of chili the day after I came home from the hospital, called Lorraine to check in, and Lorraine told her, in a confused voice, that Bethany had everything under control. Diane stopped coming. My brother in Cincinnati called to ask if I needed company on a weekend, and Lorraine said Bethany had the schedule full. He stopped calling. Sandra Okafor, the physical therapist, started coming to the house 3 times a week, and Bethany made a point of being there for every session, sitting in the corner of the living room with her laptop open. Working remotely, she said. I watched Sandra's face the first time Bethany did this. Sandra did not say a word. She just took her notes in a leather-bound binder, kept her eyes on my knees, and did not look up. Around week 4, Lorraine started watching me differently. I'd catch her in the doorway of the bedroom when I was reaching for my water glass. I'd look up for my crossword, and she'd be standing at the kitchen counter, studying me. I asked her what was wrong, and she smiled and said nothing. But the next day she asked me very gently what year it was. Just like that. Out of the blue. At breakfast. I told her it was the year it was. She nodded and looked relieved and said, Bethany said you'd been a little confused yesterday. I had not been confused yesterday. I had been doing the New York Times Saturday crossword and pen and finished it in 41 minutes. But I didn't say that. I said, I'm fine, Lorraine. And she nodded and brought me my coffee and did not meet my eyes. The weight of staying began to settle on me in small, specific ways. My cell phone bill arrived, and I will say arrived loosely, because by then I had to ask Bethany to bring it from the P.O. box. And she brought me a paper printout instead of the original envelope, which was a small thing, a nothing thing, except that the printout showed calls I had not made. A number in Columbus I did not recognize. Calls placed at 10:47 in the morning when I was in PT. Texts sent at 2:13 in the afternoon when I was napping. When I asked Lorraine about it, she frowned and said Bethany had mentioned I'd been confused about the phone, and maybe we should simplify my plan. Switch to a flip phone? Something easier. I looked at my wife of 41 years and I saw for the first time that she was being managed. Someone was managing my wife's perception of me, and the someone had a key to our house and a casserole dish in our refrigerator and a checklist with my name at the top of it. I want to tell you what it feels like to be 67 years old, recovering from a major surgery, depended on others for transportation and errands, and realized that the person you depended on was building a case against you. It feels like being inside a house where the walls are slowly moving inward, 1 inch a night, while everyone around you tells you the house is exactly the same size it has always been. It feels like being a civil engineer, a man who designed 3 bridges that carry traffic across this county every day, and being told you can no longer remember what day it is. It feels like watching your wife flinch when you say her name. I did not say anything. I am going to be honest about that. For 2 more weeks, I said nothing. I watched. I took notes in the margin of my crossword book. I marked dates. I asked Lorraine casual questions about what Bethany had said to her, and I memorized the answers. I was gathering data. That is what 38 years of civil engineering teaches you. Before you condemn a structure, you gather data. You document the load. You photograph the fractures. You date the report. Because when you finally make your case, the case has to be airtight. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday in early October. Bethany had come by with my favorite pie, apple with a lattice crust, from the bakery on Sycamore Street that Lorraine and I had been going to since 1992. She set it on the counter and kissed Lorraine on the cheek and said, in that bright, cheerful voice that never seemed to get tired, "I just want what's best for Dad." Then she sat at our kitchen table and helped Lorraine fill out what she called the disability insurance paperwork the surgeon's office needs. Lorraine signed as witness. Bethany took the papers, put them in her tote bag, the canvas one with the embroidered sunflower, and left. I watched all of this from the doorway of the den, leaning on my walker, and I thought, that smile had teeth. That afternoon, while Lorraine was at the library, I did 3 things. I called my old colleague Hollis at the county assessor's office and asked him very casually to pull the recent activity on my property. I called the family cell phone provider and asked them to email me a complete account log for the last 60 days, all 4 lines on the family plan. And I called my bank, the small credit union we'd used since 1986, and asked for a complete statement on the joint savings account. Hollis called me back in 20 minutes. He said, "Marcus, are you sitting down?" I was sitting down. He said a quitclaim deed had been filed on my property 9 days earlier, transferring full ownership to Bethany Ellison. He said it had been notarized and witnessed and recorded properly, and it would be a matter of public record. He paused. He said, "Marcus, did you do this?" I told him no. I told him I had not signed any deed. I told him my wife had not signed any deed. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I'm going to email you the certified copy. You need to come down here in person, and you need to look at it with your own eyes, because the 30-day challenge window starts the day of filing, and that gives you about 21 days to act." The email arrived an hour later. I printed it on the printer in my home office. I sat at my desk, the desk I'd built in 1998, from a salvaged oak door, and I read the deed 3 times. Then I looked at the notary seal under the magnifying lamp I keep for fine work. And I felt, for the first time in my entire life, a sensation I can only describe as my body becoming a tuning fork. 38 years of looking at notary stamps. I knew what the new seal looked like. They'd switched to a debossed design with a circular border in 2021. The seal on my deed was the old flat impression stamp, the one phased out 4 years ago, which meant the seal was not real, which meant the notary had not actually witnessed the signing, which meant Bethany, or someone Bethany had hired, had copied an old impression and applied it, which meant this was forgery. Federal forgery, real estate fraud. The bank statement arrived by email the next morning. $31,400 had been withdrawn from our joint savings account over 12 days. The withdrawals were structured. $4,900 each, just under the $5,000 reporting threshold, made at 6 different branch locations across 2 counties. Every single withdrawal had been made by Bethany Ellison, presenting a power of attorney signed by Lorraine. The cell phone records came in that afternoon. There was a cloud backup on the family plan I had not realized was active. I downloaded the audio files, and among the routine voicemails and the kids' video messages, I found 2 recordings that did not belong to me. The first was a voicemail Bethany had left for a loan officer at the home equity desk of a regional bank, a bank I had never done business with. And in her bright, cheerful tone, she said, "His cognition is declining rapidly." Lorraine asked me to handle everything because Marcus can't even remember what day it is anymore. I played it 4 times. By the 4th time, my jaw had locked so tightly I had to take a muscle relaxer. The second recording was the one that ended my last hesitation. It was a voice memo Bethany had recorded to herself. A practice run, I realized, for the bank meeting, coaching herself. Her own voice, alone in her car, no audience but the dashboard. She said, "Remember, sound sad, not angry. Say his memory is going. Say Lorraine is overwhelmed. Say you're the only family stepping up. They always believe the young woman crying about her sick father-in-law." I sat at my desk for a long time after that. I did not cry. I did not call my wife. I did not call my son. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a yellow legal pad. And I wrote, at the top of the first page, in block capitals, Operation Quitclaim. Underneath I wrote a numbered list, 17 items. The first item was say nothing to Bethany. The second item was assume every conversation in this house is being recorded. The third item was she has not found the safe. The safe. I had to tell you about the safe. In 1994, I bought a fireproof document safe for $89 at the hardware store on Route 4. It was the size of a small microwave, painted gunmetal gray, and it had a 3-digit combination lock and a key backup. Lorraine had laughed at me when I brought it home. She called it my little vault of paranoia. She asked me what on earth I needed a safe for, and I told her, and I was half joking at the time, that in my line of work, I had learned that documents are the only things that survive an argument. She rolled her eyes and went back to her novel. I bolted the safe to the underside of my workbench in the garage behind a sheet of 3/4-inch plywood that I screwed in place and painted to match the wall. From the front of the garage, you would never know there was a safe there. You would have to crawl under the workbench, unscrew the plywood, and know what you were looking for. Bethany had been in our garage. I knew because the broom had been moved. She had searched. She had not found. Inside that safe were duplicate copies of every document my marriage had produced. The original deed to the house, paid off in 2007. Every account statement from 1991 forward, organized by year in manila folders. The signature cards from the credit union, showing my real signature and Lorraine's real signature on file. Marriage certificate, social security cards, title to the truck, original DOT pension paperwork, tax returns for 33 years. And this is the part Bethany did not know. A complete set of duplicates of every document she had ever brought into our house, under the guise of insurance paperwork or surgery follow-up. I had been quietly copying things. Not because I suspected her. Because I'm an engineer. And I copy everything. It is the only reason I am still alive in this story. That night I lay in bed next to Lorraine and listened to her breathing. She was already asleep, curled toward me the way she'd slept for 41 years. I thought about telling her. I thought about waking her up and saying the words, and I decided, and this was the hardest decision of my entire life, that I could not. not yet. Because Lorraine cannot perform a deception. She has never been able to. If I told her tonight what I knew, by tomorrow morning her face would tell Bethany everything. And Bethany would disappear with the money and the deed and our son and our grandchildren. And the case I needed to build would collapse before it began. So I lay there in the dark, beside the woman I had loved since I was 25 years old, and I made my plan alone. The first thing I did, the next morning, was call Carlton Webb. Carlton is a lawyer in town who handled an easement dispute for me in 2003 and a small estate matter for Lorraine's mother in 2011. He is 64 years old, with a face like a Methodist deacon and a habit of cleaning his glasses with the same blue handkerchief he has carried since law school. I called him from the landline in my home office with the door closed, and I told him I needed to come see him as soon as possible, alone, and I needed him to not call back on any number, except the landline. He said he could see me at 4 o'clock that afternoon. I told Lorraine I was going to physical therapy. I asked Sandra Okafor, and this is the moment I crossed from passive observation into active operation, if she could pick me up and drive me to my appointment, because I did not want Bethany involved that day. Sandra came in her own car. I got in slowly on both knees that still ached. And as she pulled out of the driveway, I asked her, very quietly, if we could make one stop before PT. I asked her if she could drive me to Carlton Webb's office on Mason Street. She did not ask why. She looked at me once in the rearview mirror and she said, "Mr. Ellison, I was going to ask you something today, but I think maybe you already know what it is." I asked her what she meant, and she told me that Bethany had called the PT office 2 weeks earlier and tried to cancel all my remaining sessions. She had told the receptionist that the family has decided to pursue alternative care. Sandra had ignored the call because only Lorraine and I were authorized on my file. Sandra said, "I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if it was my place." I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her she might have just saved my life. She drove me to Carlton's office in silence. And when she dropped me off, she said, "I keep notes, Mr. Ellison. I keep very good notes." Carlton listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting once. I had brought a folder, the deed, the bank statements, the cell phone records, a flash drive with the 2 voice recordings. He looked at the notary seal under his desk lamp, and I watched his jaw tighten the way mine had. He set down his pen, took off his glasses, and he said, "Marcus, this is not a family matter. This is a prosecution." He told me to sit tight, to do nothing, to say nothing, and to come back the next day with Sandra's name and contact information. He told me the 30-day window on the deed challenge was tight, but he could file an emergency motion within 72 hours. He told me that what I had described was a federal financial crime, that the structured withdrawals alone, the deliberate pattern under the $5,000 reporting threshold, would trigger interest from the Financial Crimes Unit. He told me to keep the safe location secret, to keep my plan secret, and to keep performing my role. That last part was the hardest, performing my role. For 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In the visible life, I was a recovering knee surgery patient, slightly slower than usual, occasionally forgetful, grateful for Bethany's help. I let her bring me lunch. I let her sort the mail. I let her drive me to one PT appointment so she wouldn't notice that Sandra was driving me to the other 2. I called her sweetheart. I thanked her for everything. I praised her to Lorraine. I performed the role of the man she believed she was already finishing off. The slow, confused, dependent old man who could not remember what day it was. I performed him so well that some nights lying in bed, I had to remind myself who I actually was. In the invisible life, I was building a case. Carlton filed the emergency motion to void the quitclaim deed on the 18th day after filing. 4 days before the challenge window closed, he filed it under seal so it would not appear in public records where Bethany might see it. He filed simultaneous emergency motions to revoke the power of attorney, freeze the joint savings account, and place a temporary administrative hold on any pending applications, using Lorraine's signature. He subpoenaed Bethany's personal bank accounts. He brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet woman named Priya Desai, who worked out of an office in Columbus. And she began reconstructing the full pattern of withdrawals, transfers, and deposits across Bethany's accounts. Sandra Okafor filed a report with Adult Protective Services. She called me the morning she did it. She said without emotion, "Mr. Ellison, what you're describing is a pattern I've seen in 4 other cases this year. I'm required to file a report, and I'm going to do that today. The report will be confidential, and Bethany will not be notified until the investigation reaches a specific stage." I thanked her. She said, "Don't thank me. Just keep your safe locked." I drove myself to the county records office in the second week, a small victory, my first solo drive since the surgery, and I pulled certified copies of every document Bethany had filed. I matched the notary seal to the office's published history of seal designs. I documented every discrepancy. I emailed the file to Carlton at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, and that afternoon he met with Deputy Alderman of the Financial Crimes Unit. Then I had to call my son. This was the part I had been dreading. James is 40 years old. He is my only child. He had been on the road, traveling Monday through Thursday, for the entire collapse of his own marriage, and he had no idea. None. I called him on a Thursday evening when I knew he'd just gotten home from a trip to Indianapolis. I asked him to meet me for coffee the next morning at a diner in the next town over. I told him not to tell Bethany. He was quiet on the phone for a long time. I could hear my own heart in the silence. I thought, he knows. He's been part of it. But when he showed up at the diner the next morning, his face was the face of a man who had been worried about something he could not name for weeks. He sat down across from me and said, "Dad, what's going on?" I slid the folder across the table. He read for 40 minutes. The deed, the withdrawals, the voicemail transcript, the voice memo, the bank statements. By the end, his hands were shaking. He did not cry. He looked up at me once and he said, "I should have known." I told him there was no way he could have known. I told him she had constructed the whole thing around his absences. I told him I needed his help, and I needed his silence, and I needed him to keep coming home and acting normal for 2 more weeks. He looked at me across the diner table, my son, my 40-year-old boy, and he said, "Tell me what to do." I told him slowly, the way you tell a man whose foundation has just been pulled out from under him. I gave him each piece in order: the P.O. box, the mail, the phone records, the PT cancellation Sandra had refused, the casserole, the clipboard, the word Dad, the pie. I told him about Carlton, about Priya, about Sandra, about Deputy Alderman. I told him about the safe under the workbench, behind the painted plywood, that his mother had laughed at for 30 years. I watched him take it in. I watched the muscle along his jaw start to work, the way mine had been working for 3 weeks. He drank his coffee, black and cold. The diner, around us, hummed with the small business of a Friday morning, the clink of forks on china, the hiss of the grill, a waitress calling an order through the pass, and none of it touched our table. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he set his cup down on the laminated diner table, slid it 1/2 inch to the right to line up with the seam of the formica, and said, "What do you need me to do first?" That was when I knew he was still my son and not hers. The almost caught moment happened on a Friday afternoon, 6 days before the confrontation. I was on the landline with Carlton, going over the final exhibit list, when I heard the front door open. Bethany had stopped by unannounced. I did not panic. I lowered my voice, finished the sentence I was on, and then said into the receiver, In a louder, slightly confused voice, "Yes. Large pepperoni. Extra cheese. The address is 1427 Maple Court." Carlton, on the other end, paused for 1 second and then said, "Got it, Marcus." He hung up. I came out into the kitchen with my walker, smiling, and told Bethany the pizza place must have a new guy. They couldn't find our address. She laughed and said something about how delivery drivers these days don't know how to read maps. She had brought another pie. She kissed me on the cheek. Her perfume smelled like vanilla and something underneath that I could not name. Something chemical. Something cold. The way the inside of a new car smells when the dealer has sprayed it. I went back to my office and sat at my desk and did not move for 10 minutes because my hands were shaking too hard to write. The yellow legal pad sat open in front of me. I could see my own block capitals at the top of the page. Operation Quitclaim. And I waited until the tremor passed before I touched the pen. The grain of the oak desktop had a knot near the right edge that I had stared at for 27 years. I stared at it now until the knot stopped moving. Through the closed door, I could hear her moving in the kitchen, opening the silverware drawer, sliding the pie onto a plate. Each small domestic sound landed in my chest like a tap on a bell. The Villain Charm offensive came 2 days before the confrontation. Bethany invited Lorraine and me out for dinner at the restaurant on the lake where we used to go for anniversaries. She paid. She told stories about the grandchildren. She held Lorraine's hand across the table. She said, "I just want you both to know how much I love being part of this family." Lorraine cried a little. I smiled and ate my fish. The candle in the middle of the table threw an unsteady light across her face, and once or twice I saw the muscles around her mouth pull into a smile, a fraction of a second after her eyes had already done it. The order was wrong, the way it is wrong, on a face that is being assembled instead of felt. The wine in her glass caught the candle and bent the light along the inside of the bowl, a small trembling crescent that moved every time she breathed. I watched the crescent, and I watched her hands. Her hands did not match her face. Her hands were too still. When she dropped us off at home, she hugged me and said, "Get some sleep, Dad." And for one brief, terrible moment, watching her drive away under the streetlight, I thought, am I wrong? Am I wrong about her? Am I building a case against a woman who genuinely loves us? Then I went inside and listened to the voice memo again. Sounds sad, not angry. They always believe the young woman crying, and I knew I was not wrong. The night before the confrontation, I lay in bed beside Lorraine, who already knew, and I watched the ceiling fan turn the way I'd watched it for 8 weeks. I had told her finally, the day before, at Carlton's recommendation, with Carlton in the room, exactly what had happened. She had been silent for a long time, and then she had stood up, walked to the kitchen, and washed every dish in the sink. She washed them for 40 minutes. The water ran hot enough to fog the window above the sink. I could see her shoulders moving from where I sat at the kitchen table. The careful, repetitive scrub of a woman who had to keep her hands busy, or she would put them through a wall. When she came back, she sat down beside me, and she said, "I signed that paper, Marcus." She put it in front of me, and I signed it. I told her it wasn't her fault. I told her she had been lied to by someone she trusted. She did not cry. She said, "I want to be there tomorrow." And I said, "Okay." The meeting at Carlton Webb's office was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a Wednesday. Bethany had been told it was a family mediation about Marcus's mental health concerns. She had been told that Carlton was a neutral attorney who would help the family discuss next steps. She had been told that James would be there and Lorraine, and that I would be there, and that we would talk as a family about what was best for me. She arrived at 9:55 in a white blouse and dark slacks, carrying a folder of printouts about dementia care facilities. I know because I watched her park from the second floor window of Carlton's office. She got out of her car and checked her makeup in the side mirror and adjusted her hair. She was rehearsing her face. From the window, I could see the part in her hair, the small white seam of scalp, and the way her shoulders rose and fell once. A single practice breath before she crossed the parking lot. The light that morning was the flat, thin light of late October, the kind that gives nothing away. Her shadow on the asphalt was longer than she was. I watched her cross it. The oak-paneled conference room held 7 people when she walked in. Carlton at the head of the table. Me on Carlton's right. Walker leaned against my chair. Lorraine beside me. James across from where Bethany would sit. His face the color of old paper. Deputy Alderman from the Financial Crimes Unit in a navy blazer, badge clipped to her belt. Priya Desai, the forensic accountant, with the 40-page report fanned across the table in 3 neat stacks. And a court reporter in the corner, fingers ready over her stenotype. The conference table itself was a single slab of quarter-sawn white oak, fumed dark, with a brass strip down the middle where 2 halves had been joined sometime in the 1960s. I had time to notice the brass strip. I had time to notice everything. The radiator under the window ticked twice and went quiet. The blinds were half closed. A single dust mote moved through a bar of light and went out the other side. I had rehearsed this silence for 6 months. 8 weeks, but 6 months by feel. And I let it do its work. Bethany walked in. She took 2 steps. Her eyes scanned the room. Her smile started to form and then stopped halfway. Her folder of printouts hung loose. In her hand, Carlton said, very calmly, "Bethany, please have a seat." She sat. I watched her face in 11 seconds. Confusion, then recognition, then a slow drain of color from her cheeks, to her jaw, to her neck. Chalk white. I will never forget chalk white as long as I live. The pulse in her throat went visible just under the skin, a small bird beating against a window. Her right hand opened and closed once on the arm of the chair. Her left hand stayed flat against the folder in her lap, pressing down on it as if the folder might lift on its own. She did not look at James. She did not look at me. She looked at Carlton. And Carlton looked back at her, the way a Methodist deacon looks at a man who has come to confess something he cannot yet name. The court reporter's fingers tapped twice and stopped, waiting. Somewhere out in the hall, a phone rang once and was answered. The pause was the longest he had ever given her. Priya Desai spoke first. She walked Bethany through the forensic accounting report. The structured withdrawals at 6 different branch locations. The deposits into Bethany's personal account that matched the withdrawals dollar for dollar minus small amounts spent at retail locations. The home equity loan application filed using a forged power of attorney. The quitclaim deed filed with a copied notary impression. The 17 separate federal and state violations identified by the Financial Crimes Unit. Bethany did not speak. She stared at the table. Priya's voice did not rise. It did not fall. She moved through the pages, the way a surgeon moves through a chart, page after page, each one tabbed with a small colored flag, red for forgery, blue for structuring, yellow for identity, green for elder. By the time Priya reached the 17th violation, every flag in the report had been read aloud. The court reporter's fingers had not stopped. I watched the colored flags turn one by one, and I thought, this is what a load test looks like on a structure that is about to fail. Deputy Alderman spoke second. She read Bethany her rights. She told her she was not under arrest at that moment, but that an indictment was being prepared, and that any statement Bethany chose to make would be recorded. She gave Bethany the option to call an attorney before saying anything. Bethany did not call anyone. She opened her mouth once, the way a person does before a sentence, and then closed it again. The folder of dementia printouts slid 1 inch closer to the edge of her lap. Her lips moved without sound. A small dry click came from her throat. The sound a person makes when they have stopped producing saliva. She swallowed. The swallow was loud in the room. Then I spoke. I had not said a word since she sat down. I leaned forward on the table, and I felt the cool of the oak under my forearms, and I asked Carlton to play the voice memo. He plugged the small Bluetooth speaker into the laptop on the table and pressed play. Bethany's own voice filled the oak-paneled room. Sound sad, not angry. Say his memory is going. Say Lorraine is overwhelmed. They always believed the young woman crying about her sick father-in-law. The recording played for 46 seconds. The room held its breath through all of them. I watched the second hand on the wall clock cross the 6 and the 9 and the 12. Bethany closed her eyes. A single tear pushed out from the corner of one of them and ran a clean line down the chalk of her cheek and stopped at her jaw. She did not wipe it away. James, across from her, slid his wedding ring off his finger. Slowly, deliberately, like a man removing a splinter, and placed it on the conference table in front of her. He put it down gently, like it was something breakable. It was. The ring made a small sound against the oak. A tap. One syllable of metal. Nothing more. The court reporter typed the description of the gesture and stopped, fingers hovering, and then typed one more line. When the recording ended, Carlton spoke. He told Bethany that the quitclaim deed had been voided by emergency motion 3 weeks earlier. He told her the power of attorney had been revoked in the same filing. He told her the joint savings account had been frozen and the stolen funds, every dollar of the $31,400, had been recovered and transferred back to a new account in my name. He told her her personal accounts had been subpoenaed and were under active forensic review. He told her a restraining order prohibiting her from approaching me, Lorraine, our home, or our grandchildren without supervised exchange had been signed by a judge that morning. He told her, finally, that the locks on her own house had been changed at 9 o'clock that morning by James, and that her personal belongings were at her mother's house in boxes. Bethany sat very still. Her hands were folded on the table. The folder of dementia care printouts had slid off her lap onto the floor, and no one picked it up. One of the pages had separated and lay face up at her feet. A stock photograph of a smiling old man in a wheelchair beside a young blonde woman who looked nothing like her and exactly like her. She looked at James. She said, "Baby, let me explain." Her voice came out thin. James looked at her for a long moment. He did not raise his voice. He said, "The locks are changed. Your things are at your mother's house? Don't call me." Then he stood up, walked around the table, kissed the top of my head, kissed his mother, and walked out of the conference room. He did not look back. The door clicked shut behind him with a small, precise sound that I felt in my chest. 43 seconds passed before anyone spoke. I counted them. The radiator ticked again. Outside the window, a car door closed and an engine started and pulled away. Bethany turned to me. Her mouth opened. She said, "Marcus." Just the one word. Just my name. The name she had stopped using. The day I came home from the hospital. I let the silence sit on the table between us. I did not answer. I did not have to. The man she had called Dad for 8 weeks was the man she had been killing on paper, and the man she was looking at now was the one who had built 3 bridges in this county that were still standing. I held her eyes until she looked away. Her gaze went to the brass strip down the middle of the table. She stared at it the way I had stared, at the knot in my desk. The brass did not move. Deputy Alderman escorted Bethany out of the building 20 minutes later. There were no handcuffs that day. The arraignment came 11 days later. The indictment was 32 counts. The charges included aggravated theft from an elder, forgery, identity, fraud, structuring financial transactions to evade reporting, and elder abuse. The last one a felony in Ohio that carries up to 8 years. The aftermath came in waves. The first wave was the messages. Bethany called the house phone 17 times in the first 48 hours after the confrontation. She did not know yet that the restraining order prohibited contact. We did not answer. The answering machine in the kitchen. A small beige unit Lorraine had refused to replace since 2000 or Haywater. Yep. Air filled up and beeped at us from the counter every time we walked past. The little red light blinked on a 4-second cycle. I counted it once and then made myself stop. By the third day, the messages had progressed from confused to desperate to pleading. She left one voicemail that I listened to once, all the way through, and never listened to again. She said she loved us. She said she had been under financial pressure I didn't understand. She said the dementia thing had been a misunderstanding. She said she'd been trying to protect me. I deleted it. The fourth day, she stopped calling. Her own attorney, hired by her mother, told her in plain language that every contact attempt was a separate violation that would be entered into the sentencing record. She tried James next. He blocked her number. She tried her mother-in-law next. Lorraine. Lorraine answered once, listened for 90 seconds, and said, "I signed your paper because I trusted you. You used my trust. I have nothing to say to you." She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table for an hour afterward, the receiver still in her hand, looking at the place on the wallpaper where a hairline crack had been running since 2008. Her thumb rubbed the edge of the receiver in a small, slow circle. Then she stood up and went to the library to work her shift. That was the day I understood that Lorraine was going to be okay. Wounded, yes. Slower to trust, yes. But she was going to come back to herself. The cascade of consequences played out across 4 months. The forensic audit of Bethany's personal accounts revealed an additional $22,000 in fraudulent activity going back 18 months. Purchases on credit cards opened in my name that I'd never seen. A small loan taken out using Lorraine's Social Security number. And a real estate commission scheme at her own office that her employer had not yet discovered. Her real estate license was suspended within 6 weeks. The broker she worked under, a man named Donnelly, who had known Bethany since she was a college intern, called me on a Sunday afternoon and apologized for 10 minutes straight. He said he should have audited her files. He said he would be auditing every file in his office now. I told him there was no apology owed to me. I told him to check his other agents. The plea deal her attorney negotiated, presented to her on a Tuesday in February, required her to plead guilty to 14 of the 32 counts. She took the deal because the alternative was trial, and at trial the prosecution would have played the voice memo to a jury. She was sentenced to 42 months in a state correctional facility with eligibility for parole after 28 months. She was ordered to pay full restitution. James filed for divorce 3 days after the confrontation. Uncontested. He retained primary custody of Lily and Cole. Bethany's parental rights remained intact, with supervised visitation. But the children, by their own choice as the months passed, asked to see her less and less. Lily was old enough to understand some of it. Cole was not. James told them the truth in pieces, in language a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old could carry. He did not poison them against their mother. He did not have to. The facts did the work the facts were going to do. The first morning after the confrontation, I sat at the kitchen table with Lorraine and watched the light come through the curtains we'd hung in 1991. I did not have to perform anything. I did not have to manage anyone's perception. I did not have to wonder if the phone was being recorded, or the mail intercepted, or the deed forged. The house was ours again. Not because the paperwork said so, though it did, but because the woman who had been moving through it like a tide had been pulled out, and the rooms had settled back into their right shapes. I made coffee. I poured 2 cups. I carried them to the table without my walker, slowly, on knees that were healing. Lorraine watched me cross the floor and did not say anything. She just took her cup when I set it down and held it with both hands. That is the silence I want to tell you about. Not dramatic silence. Not movie silence. The silence of a kitchen at 7 in the morning where two people who have known each other for 41 years are drinking coffee in a house that belongs to them. The clock on the stove, the hum of the refrigerator after the door closed, a bird outside on the railing, a chickadee, 2 notes, one lower than the other, repeated. Lorraine's breath. My breath. The first morning in 8 weeks where no one with a key was about to walk through the door. The first morning in 8 weeks where my body did not run hot with the low-grade fever of vigilance. I felt my shoulders drop. I had not realized they had been up. They had been up since August. The coffee was too hot. I drank it anyway. The steam fogged the lower edge of my glasses. And through the fog, I watched my wife lift her cup with both hands, the way a child lifts a glass of milk, carefully, with attention. She had not looked at me like that in 8 weeks. She looked at me now. The sun moved a 1/4 inch across the table while we sat, lighting first the salt shaker and then the small chip on the edge of her saucer that we had both refused to throw out for 19 years. 6 months later, on a Saturday in April, I sat on the back porch of the Craftsman house Lorraine and I bought in 1991. I had built 4 raised garden beds during my recovery, on the days when I could stand for an hour at a time. The beds were rough but level. The cedar smelled of resin, still, even after the winter. Lorraine was kneeling beside the second one with Lily and Cole, who were now 8 and 5, showing them how to space the tomato starts. Lily had her grandmother's careful hands. Cole had dirt on his face. James was in the garage, fixing the latch on the side door, the one Bethany had used to come and go. I could hear the small, bright sound of his screwdriver from where I sat. 4 turns. A pause. 4 turns. The maple tree I had planted the year he was born threw a moving shadow across the lawn. The wind moved through it the way wind moves through 40 years of branches. I caught myself counting weeks. 23 weeks since the sentencing. I caught myself doing it, and I felt the small, familiar grief of realizing that the counting hadn't stopped. The grief lives in the pause before I trust a kindness now. It lives in the deadbolt I added to the front door, which I do not actually need, but which I check every night before bed. It lives in the way Lorraine still flinches a little when the mail carrier comes up the walk, even though the mail comes to our box again, the way it always did. The grief is part of the structure now. I have made peace with that. A bridge that has been damaged and rebuilt is still a bridge. The engineers who rebuilt it know exactly where the failure was, and they check that spot every year. I want to talk to you for a moment, directly. If someone in your family volunteered to help during a hard time, and then slowly became the only person allowed to help, if they are sorting your mail, answering your phone, canceling your appointments, telling other people that you are confused, that is not love. That is a perimeter. And if you're listening to this story right now and thinking, but she's so sweet, she does everything for them, I want you to ask yourself one question. Who decided that no one else gets to help? Because in a real family, in a healthy family, help is a chorus. It is many voices, many casseroles, many phone calls. When the chorus becomes a soloist, something is wrong. Not always criminal, but always worth noticing. Look at the perimeter. Look at who decided who was allowed inside. I used to believe that family closes ranks around its own. I was wrong about that. Family closes ranks around the truth. And sometimes the truth is that one member of the family is harming the others, and the rest of the family has to choose between protecting the harm doer and protecting the harmed. That is the choice James had to make at that conference table. He made it in 7 seconds. He took off his ring. He chose the truth. I was proud of him then. I am proud of him now. I used to believe that being trusting was the same as being good. I was wrong about that too. Trust is not goodness. Trust is a tool. And like any tool, it has to be used with judgment. The most generous person I know, my wife, Lorraine, was used by someone who counted on her generosity as a weakness. It wasn't a weakness. It was a gift. The person who exploited it was the one who failed, not Lorraine. But I have learned that a gift offered without discernment can be turned against the giver. So Lorraine and I, in our 65th and 67th years on this earth, are learning a slower kind of trust. The kind that asks one more question. The kind that keeps duplicate copies. The kind that puts the safe under the workbench, behind the plywood, where the takers don't look. This has been the story of how my daughter-in-law told a bank I had dementia so she could drain our life savings in 19 days, and how a 67-year-old retired civil engineer with 2 new knees and a fireproof safe bolted under his workbench built a case strong enough to take her down. 1 forged deed, 1 bright, cheerful voicemail, and 1 apple pie that I never ate. If you have ever sat in a chair you couldn't get up from while someone moved your life around you, I would like to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what you noticed first. The mail, the phone calls, the favorite pie, the smile with teeth. Tell me what your instinct said before your mind agreed. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do. We tell these stories so the next person who hears the first wrong note in the music recognizes it sooner than I did. Take care of your documents. Take care of your wife. And if your gut is telling you something is wrong inside your